of this meeting for public broadcast. I ask anyone else in the audience who is recording this meeting to please identify themselves for the record now by standing and stating their names and address. No one here, great. Councilor Zarella, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And Madam Clerk, will you conduct the roll call?
President Kushmarek, Councilor Boschman,
Present.
Councilor Clark,
Here.
Councilor Di Natale.
Here.
Councilor Donnelly.
Here.
Councilor Fleming.
Here.
Vice President Green.
Here.
Councilor Caddy.
Here.
Councilor Squalia.
Present.
Councilor Walsh.
Here.
Councilor Zarella.
Here.
Public forum. Anyone wishing to speak on any matter on the agenda may do so, but not more than 2 minutes. If you are addressing the public hearing petitions, you will have an opportunity to speak at that time. Please approach the center table and identify yourself by name and address for the record and the item number on the agenda you are addressing. And here we have Mr. Terigny.
Good evening, Councilor. My name is AJ Terigny, Chief of Staff to Mayor Di Natale, and happy Tuesday. I'm here before you this evening on Order 106-18. This is approval for a host agreement with Garden Remedies. The mayor, in an effort to be business friendly and acknowledge the onerous task of applying to the state for both for the non-medical cultivation license with Garden Remedies. He's asking to expedite the approval process of the host agreement, which was negotiated with our city solicitors, so that they can continue with that process.
Motion to suspend the rules on 106-18.
Second.
I have a motion and second to suspend the rules. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.
Motion to approve 106-18.
Second.
I have a motion. Speaking to the motion, Councilor Boschman.
On the motion, you know, I've been watching patiently. I've been saying 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8, and I think we're becoming the capital of pot in our city. Is there anything else we can do besides grow pot? I mean, we can't get manufacturing to come in and that stuff. I mean, really?
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 Councilor, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, by all means.
This Garden Remedies has been an existing. Actually, they were one of the first cultivation facilities operating in the Fitchburg. This is technically not a new facility. They started their process back in 2015 and 2016, and since then, when the mayor took office, he's been working with them along with the solicitor's office to obtain a host agreement, and that's what's before you this evening. Sorry,
Asher
sir.
Pants, right?
Sorry.
Where the Asher Pants used to be, or the
New England Wire. New England Wire.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm all set. Thank you,
Councilor
Madam
Zarella.
President.
Just to confirm, this is substantially the same host agreement as the last one that we reviewed, just for a different company? Are the terms mostly identical?
I'm going to allow.
Attorney Tree, thank you.
This host agreement is substantially different in one very important respect, which is that this was an existing business that was paying no host fee to the city. And what this host agreement is now doing is having this business, who had the right to continue in nonconformity without a host agreement, apply this host fee to not only their new operations that they are adding, but also all of the existing operations. So it is different in that respect. It is somewhat different in that it recognizes that non-medical marijuana is likely to begin as soon as they have permission from the estate and from the local authority. So the fees are 1.25 for third-party sales and 1% for sales that are made within the company. So this company produces here. It has a retail operation elsewhere. If, without this host agreement, the transfer of that product from here to the retail facility in another town would be without any compensation to the city, because our tax does not apply to it. So that would be an outline. There is a somewhat smaller contribution to the Community Relations Board in recognition of the fact that they have applied this fee to all of their activities when they were not under the obligation to do so, including the ones that pre-existed the necessity of the host agreement.
That's pretty much what I thought. Excellent.
I got one.
Counselor Boishman.
Got one question. What happens if, where do we fall back on, say if you, we put all these regulations and rules in by the state and us, the city of Fitchburg, but what happens is let's say if you're driving around and you get an operation of business here, but you can actually literally smell the stuff, what does the consumer, the residents have, what rights do they have? If literally you can smell it when you're driving.
Go ahead.
So I would say that that would fall under the issue of being a public nuisance, and that's something that's reportable to the Board of Health. All of the operations are supposed to be without this kind of effect of an odor upon the surrounding community, so that would be in violations of the terms of their operation.
All right, I just want to check. All right, thank you.
Oh, it's Counselor Squalia.
Just to clarify, so what this host agreement does is institutes a community relations board, which includes 3 members of Garden Remedies Company and 3 members chosen by the mayor. And this allows a $5,000 annual contribution to the community relations board to donate to charity of the choice of the board's, to the
Related to-
determination of the board relating to
Relating to the city of Fitchburg and its needs.
Right. So, and that's an annual $5,000
Contribution.
contribution to this Community Relations Board.
Right.
Thank you.
Counselor Donley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know this is in manufacturing, but Fitchburg voted to be a farming community some years ago. So if there was a growth industry, it's I would call it somewhat of a food product, but it's a plant. And if you had a farm in a farming area, people don't have the right to complain about smells. Is that correct? Fitchburg is adopted to be a farming community. So in this growth industry, is there any cross protection?
I agree with the assistant solicitor. I think that, first of all, they have a significant amount of odor control through the Department of Public Health regulations. But if there was a nuisance, and it was not an a rural residential or a farming area that's zoned for it, let's say it was happening in a light industrial, maybe affecting a neighborhood, they would be able to bring some type of action. Or they would just be able to go contact your health department, sir, and they would be able to enforce that. But that's an interesting question, and we could look into it further if that becomes an issue for you.
No, I supported the farming community, so I stand there. Thank you.
I have a motion on the floor to accept 10618. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, motion granted.
Thank you, counselors.
Anyone else? Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Paula Karen, 75 Prospect Street, in Fitchburg. Planning Board as well. Just here about the first reading for the marijuana establishments ordinance regarding some of the red line versions criteria, specifically 181-656 special permit criteria and findings. There's section, item number 11.
It was 18165, Ms. Karen?
Yes, 181-656.
Yep. and
Item
then Section
11.
11.
It's red line. It has to do with the application for the establishment to be 1,000 feet from another establishment of the same type. So regarding it, to adjust how the setback is measured from establishment to establishment, because presently the reading is similar to the 300-foot from the protected uses, where it says a portion of the nearest point of the property line of the existing MR to the nearest point of the structure of the proposed MR. So that was to give more of a protected use to the, more of a credence to the protected use. Since this is just measuring distances from two identical uses, the measuring of the 1,000 feet should be equivalent. So either measure property line to property line or nearest point of structure to nearest point of structure. So that should be clarified, so that one establishment isn't considered more of a protected use by measuring to its property line versus a structure on another when it's the same use. Another clarification, there's this underneath A, where it can be reduced, the distance requirement may be reduced by the planning board, provided that the planning board determines that a shorter distance, it then says adequately buffered, will suffice to accomplish the objective set forth. In 18165, I think remove the word adequately buffered, because again, that language was identical to the 300 feet we're talking about buffering from residences or other types of uses. And here, we're talking 1,000 feet from one MR facility, 1,000 feet to another, so not sure how adequately buffered really applies. So I don't think that it really applies as a criteria of buffering one MR facility to another.
Counselor Di Natale.
Just a public comment. Can you repeat the first one?
Sure, about the setback?
Yes, the setback. Repeat
Sure.
that again about what you think the amendment should be?
The language, let's see, so it should read, "The distance under this section is measured in a straight line, said from the nearest portion of the building in which one MR is located to the nearest portion of the building in which the other MR retailer is located."
Strike the word structure and insert the word building.
However you'd like to.
Strike property line to structure.
Again, you could use, that's being, rather than property line, it could be, parcels could be rather large if you just want to do it, give a more advantage to each facility and go structure to structure.
All right, thank you.
And then strike adequately buffered.
Okay.
That. And then also consider exempting existing medical dispensaries from the 1,000-foot provision, as those facilities are pretty much already established. You could say that after that last sentence about the distance, this distance requirement shall not apply for applications for MR licenses that are from an existing medical dispensary license operating under a current valid medical dispensary located within the city of Fitchburg, and the marijuana retail license or MR application is for the same address at which the medical dispensary is currently operating. So something, I know, that was a lot.
I have that language. in
I only have 2 minutes.
Make it fast, man, you're on countdown, no?
We have this in an email, so we can certainly get to that point.
If you want
Go
to,
through the ordinance.
define
and
that.
you get the correct amendment, sir.
okay. And last but not least, on criteria 1, I would, talks about the location of this MR. I would exclude the medical services district. I don't think it's included on the map, but it is in the language here. It again, it is 181-656, paragraph 1. As it is not exactly a highly visible location for policing purposes and for the schools that are located there, and also that it's a retail use in a highly restricted medical use area versus
Is
just being
that-
general retail.
Is that marked on your map as
It's,
MSD
yes.
sections or areas?
It would be, there's
Okay.
only one MSD section, which would be the former Burbank Hospital area. That's the only one MSD in the city.
Okay.
But it's, I believe it's not on the map that was provided, but it's in the language here. So I would say strike it from here to match the map. In the language.
Counselor Di Natale.
So your recommendation is, when we get to that point, I don't know if this is appropriate because public comment period. I don't know if we should probably wait, right? Unless we bring this up now.
It's moving into its first reading as amended, but apparently there'll be more amendments to the proposed amendments.
Well, how about this? I don't know if maybe the attorneys can stop me here. I would like to move up on the agenda item and make a motion on 3118 to adopt the first reading as amended, but with additional amendments. First one being 181-656, Section 11, Part A, strike the language adequately buffered as one amendment.
amend 181-656, number 11, to read, strike the words nearest point of the property, well, strike the words property line and replace it with structure. Is that clear? Okay.
It's clear, but we don't, not all of us have been given the paper
Okay, so then,
edition of that.
okay, what
so-
I'm trying to figure out is, we have someone here in public comment asking us to make amendments, and we're going back and forth on what it should be, so I'm okay with waiting until we get to that period. I'm just, don't want to forget what this woman is saying, and
We have it down.
we have it down, okay.
I took down.
You took down the notes,
remarks,
okay.
And I wanted to go through the ordinance with you, sir, so that when we get to that point.
All right,
Is that it?
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to bring up to us?
That's it at this time. I'm available for questioning later, anytime. Okay.
Okay. I'm sure you'll be called back up again. All right. Does anyone else wish to speak? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the report of the Committee of Records. Counselor Donley.
Thank you. We have reviewed the records and they appear to be order, thanks to the city clerk and his staff.
move the committee on records report be accepted.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Communications from His Honor the Mayor. So there are 3 appointment letters. Ms. Deanna Tardif as a member of the Fitchburg Disability Commission for a term to expire May 1st, 2019. Second, Mr. Joshua Berdarian as a member of the Water Wastewater Commission for a term to expire April 1st, 2022. Connor Griffin as a permanent full-time firefighter for the city of Fitchburg. We'll send those to appointments. Communications and reports from heads of department, and we have one from Attorney Vincent Pusateri II, City Solicitor, regarding amending the ordinance 031-2018. That is going to a first reading tonight, so we'll wait and address it at that time. Okay, thank you. Okay, annual report, petition 10518 of the City Clerk's Office for the calendar year 2017.
Report be waived, reading will be waived and placed on file with the city clerk's office about the city clerk.
Thank you. Thank you. That will be in the City Clerk's office. Reports of committees from the Board of Health, 19417. Counselor Michael Kuzmarek and resident Keith Connor to investigate and mitigate increased delays for resident use at the landfill and the installation of a fast lane. And I believe Mr. Curry, is he here? Oh, yes, there he is. Okay. Mr. Curry, do you want to address this?
Sure, thank you, councilors. Councilors, due to the petition, basically we just installed a couple of lanes via cones on the busy season at the landfill, so the residents can now bypass the scale house and the rubbish trucks, and they can go off to the left of the landfill where the yard waste area is, and there is facilities to dispose of trash over there. And then the residents could all, if they wish to use the recycling, they could go right around the scale house and use the recycling drop-off. So I believe that this arrangement has corrected the issue of long delays behind rubbish trucks at the landfill. It's only done during the active seasons, which is just about starting right now. So most of the winter it was taken down, but it's now back in force.
So April to October, April to...
Yeah, April through October is very active.
Okay. Counselor Caddy?
Steve, is there any signage there indicating that to the public?
There is a signage, some signs at the cones on where to enter, yeah. But there is also an individual always standing there, and basically that individual from Waste Management is checking permits and loads to make sure that the materials that are coming in. So that there's 99% of the time there's a greeter there.
Thank you.
Counselor Squalia?
Is it in your opinion that this is already being done and thus it's not necessary to go to the Board of Health, that we should give it leave to withdraw?
It actually did go to the Board of Health.
Oh, it already
We've
went-
actually discussed it
Oh,
on a
it's the
couple of
report.
couple of meetings, yeah.
Okay, so this is something that's new, this fast lane.
Actually, this petition came out in June or July of last year, so it's not new. It's been in effect since last summer.
So last summer, you didn't install a fast lane,
Correct,
and so you've been using it in the busy season since.
correct.
What is the busy season?
Again, that's usually the April to, it's up to the weather. It's up to the snow. We've had some busy seasons in February with no snow, and we've had some very slow seasons. March, there's no rhyme or reason anymore, but for the most part, it's April to October.
Okay, great, thank you.
Motion to accept the Board of Health's report.
Second.
Second. Sorry.
I have a motion and second to accept the Board of Health report. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Very good, Steve, thank you.
Moving on, City Property Committee oral report from Counselor Zarella.
We had two petitions before us, 315 and 316-17, and the recommendation was that both be held until we can receive further information from the petitioner and from Commissioner Laxo.
Motion to accept the Property Committee's report.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Finance Committee, Counselor Di Natale.
Finance met last Tuesday and took up the following, 9318, transferring within the city clerk's office $3,115 and transferring it to election and registration, personal services, election registration, personal services overtime, and crediting the city clerk's personal services, assistant clerk, and city clerk personal services overtime. That was adopted. 9418, there being hereby is appropriated the sum of $600 to be charged against available funds and credited to city clerk personal services overtime. That was adopted. 9518, there being hereby is appropriated the sum of $65,000 to be charged against available funds and credited to Council on Aging building maintenance for the purpose of improving the air quality in the basement of the senior center. That was adopted. And 9618, that the City of Fitchburg approves the expenditure of funds from the Mass Executive Office of Public Safety and Security grant in the approximate amount of $4,418.40 for the purpose of said grant, which is to enhance effective pedestrian, bicycle, and moped type enforcement. That was adopted.
Motion to approve the Finance Committee report.
Second.
I have a motion and second to accept the report. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Planning Board, meeting of April 10th, 2018, petition 10218. The City of Fitchburg Planning Board to amend Section 181.13, 14A of the Fitchburg zoning ordinance to allow seasonal outdoor dining as permitted use in the industrial and light industrial districts as shown on the attached.
Motion to send 10218 to a city council hearing May 2nd.
Second.
That's a typo.
Okay, that would be May 1st. That was a typo. That will be May
May
1st. All those in favor?
Aye.
Public hearing. 100-18, Comcast of Massachusetts 3 Incorporated for a grant of location to install a new underground conduit system to provide service to 29 and 37 to 43 Blossom Street. Good evening.
Good evening.
Nice to see you
Madam Chair.
again.
Nice to see you.
I own property on Blossom Street, which will be directly affected by this, so I'd like to recuse myself.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Donnelly. So we'll make a note of that. And if you could once again state your name for us.
Dave Fawelling, Comcast. I'd like to speak in favor of the petition for Comcast to install conduit on Blossom Street, starting at the existing utility pole number 1/92, excavating to install 2 3-inch PVC conduits, 322 feet plus or minus to a proposed 24 by 34, 36-inch sidewalk vault, continuing from the proposed vault with 2 3-inch PVC conduits, 60 feet plus or minus as shown on the attached construction sketch, and one of those 2-inch pipes, 3-inch pipes would be for the city.
Any questions or comment by Councilor?
What's the 3-inch pipe for the city for?
The shadow conduit that we, every time we put in a conduit, we're supposed to put in one for you, for the city.
Just in case we have.
I know that I'm always asked at the end, so I I thought I'd just put that out
So
there.
just in case we need it in the future.
Yeah,
We don't
if you
have to
need
dig
it
the
for the
road up
future,
again?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
And I assume that what you tear up, you're going to
Yes.
patch and put back nice?
Yes.
Okay.
What he gets for being thorough.
Motion to approve 118.
Second?
You have to finish the hearing.
We have to finish the hearing, so I have to ask if
Sorry.
anyone wishes to speak from the audience in favor of the petition. Anyone wishing to speak against, in opposition of the petition? Hearing none, declare the hearing closed. Oh, I forgot to do that. Matter is now before
Motion to
council.
approve 100-18.
Second?
I have a motion and second to approve 118. Speaking to the motion, Councilor Boishman.
I just want to ask one question. If they're going to dig up the sidewalk, and then they're going to come back and patch it, after a period of time, everything's settled, will they come back and fix the sidewalks over again if they go down?
The majority of the excavation work is going to be in the street, so it'd be only one or two potential panels that we would be putting this vault in, and we would set the vault and replace that entire panel. So
Okay.
there wouldn't be any settlement in it because it'd be a new panel.
Okay, all right then. I got no problem with that.
Councilor Squalia.
So we're talking about coming from installing a new sidewalk vault in front of 43 Blossom Street?
Yes.
And then running approximately 300 feet up Blossom Street to a utility pole, or vice versa? It's coming from the utility pole?
It's coming from the utility pole down to a vault to 43, and then we're going to 29. And then in addition, there was the, Councilor Donley there, going across the street potentially.
To 50
To
Blossom
50.
Street?
Yes, correct.
So we're excavating the street down to a new sidewalk vault, and then again down the street to
Yes.
29?
Yes. So
Yep.
there'd be two vaults on that side, and then across the street to 50, so that technically, we would go across the street to 50.
Okay, thank you.
When will this work, when is it scheduled to take place?
We're looking to do this as soon as possible. This is basically, there was at one time, there was a street light on there that the city removed, and for whatever reason, we were temporarily attached to that, and when they removed the pole, our line was attached in the trees, so we're looking to address that issue and remove that line that's temporarily attached or strung up in the tree. So that will eliminate that installation.
Okay. I have a motion and second to approve 118. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to I declare the hearing closed, okay, and moving on to public hearing 10118, Lieutenant Phil Jordan, Fire Prevention Board, and Kevin Roy, Chief of the Fire Department, to revoke the land license for flammable combustible storage at 938 Main Street upon request of the landowner. Hello, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, councilors. The landowner of that property, in a money-saving effort for himself, has called the Fire Prevention Bureau, and working with the city clerk, we decided to go with public record on this. The landowner has asked to revoke the license so that he is no longer encumbered the cost of the land license there. The revocation, just so you understand, is not for any wrongdoing. The tanks became of age and the tanks were removed, and it was decided by the landowner not to recommit tanks into that ground. The tanks were removed, there was soil samples taken. He has made every precaution that he needed to do with the DEP to clear that site. He has just asked to revoke the property land license, so he is no longer incurred for that fee for a service that he is no longer offering. In discussion with the city clerk, our concerns were where the new codes and ordinances are more strict. Once he removed that land license, there is a possibility that it may not qualify under new codes, ordinances, and setbacks, where that is such a tight area to the gas station up near the Boulder, that he was well advised that once you do this, you can't go back, and he was well advised. He was discussed that personally with him, and he is in favor of revocation of this permit, so we're here on his behalf.
And is that is at the little, what was at one point the little gas station?
That is correct.
Right
Where the
there.
Boulder is, a unified gas station.
Okay, so this essentially means that they're moving forward is not going to be a gas station there.
Correct. There's nothing in the ground right now. Everything's been removed. The only thing left is the building and potentially an underground oil tank to feed the furnace at that building site, but there is nothing as far as DEP concern or soil issues at that site. Everything's been removed.
Right, Counselor Boishman?
How much are the fees per month? How much are the fees per year? Is it $100 a year?
It wasn't substantial. I'd have to ask the city clerk. Was it $25 or $50?
Yes, you can
answer.
No, but if you'd like, certainly you can answer that, yes.
It's a nominal fee. It's $100 or less. It's based on total gallons.
It's a shame that you're doing that, really. You're taking away a potential site if he wants to sell it.
Counselor Caddy?
Just so you know, the property's under purchase and sales right now for another use.
Great. All right. If anyone wishes to speak from the audience in favor of the petition? Anyone from the audience wishing to speak in opposition of the petition? Hearing none, I declare the hearing closed.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Well, I gotta find it first. 10118.
I have a motion and second to approve 10118. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you and good night, councilors.
Thank you. All right, orders finance.
Move 10718 through 11018 be sent to finance.
Second.
Motion second to send 107 up to and including 11018 to finance. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Ordinance 06618, an ordinance, be it ordained by the City Council of the City of Fitchburg that Chapter 147-35 of the Code of the City of Fitchburg relative to the adoption of charges and fees be and hereby is amended as follows, by inserting the following table of Chapter 147, Section 35.2.
Rates.
Right, this is the sewer rate.
6618 be sent to its third and final reading
Second.
as amended to include the revised fee schedule.
I have a motion second to send 06618 to its final reading. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. 09918, an ordinance that Chapter 120, Section 11 of the Code of the City of Fitchburg entitled Annual Renewal Certificate Fees for Flammable Liquids be deleted in its entirety.
Move 9918 be sent to its third and final reading.
Second.
Motion and second to send 09918 to its final reading. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Here we go. Ordinance 03118, an ordinance as amended. And Attorney Pusateri, would you like to take over from here as new amendments and additions?
Madam President, councilors, we believe we captured the intent of the vote when we were last discussing this, but we identified, and it was also called to our attention, there might be some issues that would be worth clarifying before we send this to the first reading. So Attorney Tree and I took some time, we prepared an ordinance. What we did is we footnoted that, attached that to the letter to you, dated April 12th, and I would just ask if everyone wanted to look at that. It was in the packet. If not, I could certainly guide us right through what we saw are some of the potential issues. We have,
I was going to say, would you like to read, as you have it amended further, 181.6546? That includes the footnotes, correct?
yes, so I'll jump right to that then, thank you. So the first issue that we had is whether or not independent testing facilities would be permitted in the neighborhood districts, and we would like to have the council's clarification on that. Our suggestion would be that the council could entertain a motion or a vote based on the question of, provided my footnote 2, will there be independent testing facilities in neighborhood districts? We did bring a map of the area.
Well, we're looking for that motion to divide the question as per the recommendations of the city solicitor.
And my understanding of Councilor Dina Zarrella's position would be each footnote we would do as an independent motion?
Yeah, I think that's acceptable
Okay.
and easy to follow and,
I'm happy to go right through each one of them.
okay.
So the map is not
That's for dispensaries. though,
Okay.
So
Okay.
it doesn't include MB.
Which letter and footnotes are we referring to? I'm sorry.
Counselor, I have a letter April 12th.
To President Kuchmarek?
Yes, please. If you flip, there's a prepared ordinance. On the third page, you'll see a series of footnotes beginning.
Oh, okay.
Footnote 2 would be our first question that we're asking you to identify.
Okay.
Do you see that on there, Councilors
The only map.
Squalia, at the bottom of the footnotes?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Do we want to go through these and?
Sure, so the first question.
How many neighborhood districts, and are those laid out on the map, or?
Not on the map or any of them that you've received, just our traditional neighborhood business districts as defined in the zoning. So I think the question there, in accepting the planning board's recommendations, it was sort of implicitly assumed that you would be accepting that one in particular, but because the bulk of the conversation really laid within what we're going to be doing with non-medical dispensaries, not much discussion was given to independent testing. I guess since I was there at the planning board meeting, just to give you sort of an overview as to why they felt to go in that direction, I think a lot of the zoning concerns that folks had, particularly with regard to dispensaries, whether it's, smell or public safety concerns or any of those things, really aren't an issue whatsoever in the testing facilities themselves. It's really not for mass production, not for mass consumption, just to actually test the quality control of the product as if one would test any other medical, any other type of independent medical testing.
Councilor Zarella?
I would concur. I think of all the concerns that were raised by audience members and counselors during our initial debate on this, none of them really apply to the testing facilities. So personally, I don't see any reason not to allow them wherever.
Okay, we'll take a vote, and I'll read it as it is in the footnotes, as amended to the big ordinance. Will there be independent testing facilities in neighborhood districts? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? One in opposition, so that's 10
Thank you,
yes,
Madam
1
President.
no.
The next item, just to move quickly, is clarifying exactly where the council would like to have the marijuana retailers, which is, as my friend Tom has explained, would be the actual dispensing of non-medical marijuana. It seemed pretty clear that council was interested in having that in all commercial areas. However, it had been brought to my attention that there was some desire to have that clarified. And so I asked that we take a look at footnote number 3. I've listed the different commercial areas A through F. There's commercial automotive, there's medical services, and we did hear from our planning board chair regarding medical services already, and that's going to be echoed later. So your determination on that will resolve her issue. There's neighborhood business districts, which is, again, I think was the crux of what the issue was in the drafting of the ordinance. Certainly, there's central business districts with the exclusion of what council had determined, the Main Street Central Business District, and there's light industrial and industrial. My suggestion is you could take that as one vote and removing those in which you feel the council might not be interested in approving in a positive. So you may do that, commercial, automotive, central business district, light industrial, and then you could focus your council in on the neighborhood business district issue. And obviously, as your planning board chair talked about, the medical business.
Right, I think we will take them, we'll take them individually as A,
Okay.
and then I can read it and get the
Okay.
vote on that.
Yes.
May I ask a question?
Counselor Boschman?
When we say Main Street exclusion, when we take the vote, I thought Marcus Dinatari, when we talked on April 10th, I thought it was from Main Street Boulder Drive, and it stopped at Blossom Street, and it went so far. But now, when I was talking to Tom today, he's telling me that it goes all the way down Main Street.
So just, Counselor, it's a very good question because, and that's why we want to make sure we have the clarification. The The central business district that includes Main Street was a specific exclusion. The one issue that we had when we were drafting the ordinance, and you're going to see that in your next series of footnotes, is whether or not Market Basket in that area of that central business district was going to be included. Your question then raises another issue, which would be to the east of Blossom Street.
Right.
Moving that way, and that would be a new issue as well. How far east, I'm asking Tom to, if Tom can advise us how far east we talk about there. That be to the intersection of,
So we would be going east, basically, to the intersection of Main and Lunenburg, going up just a bit, and then going north on North Street up to the college. So what we took that to mean, and which is why we're bringing it in front of you as a matter of debate here this evening, is originally, I think Councilor Di Natale had mentioned all central business districts but Main Street, and when asked to clarify, he noted that that would be the central business district that includes Main Street. At the same time, you also voted to approve of the planning board's recommendations, but only adding on, not reducing. One of the planning board recommendations was to include the central business district south of the railroad tracks. That includes part of the Water Street Plaza and where the, I'm getting a look, so I'll take questions at this
Madam
point.
President, if I could just follow up my friend's.
It's a mouthful, I understand.
My friend's comments. The specific description of the Main Street Central Business District would be in your next footnote number 4, and so it might provide you some efficiency to wait and have a hearing on how to describe your Main Street exclusion when we hit the footnote number 4, but just to get us through the broad strokes, if you will, regarding what commercial districts you want to have this approved in.
Right. Counselor Di Natale.
Can we proceed with the footnotes?
Sure.
Are we on number 2?
Yep, so we will move on to...
Because this is going to get confusing before it gets simpler, so.
Will there be marijuana retailers in commercial and automotive districts? Yes. All those in favor, yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Opposed? Opposition. Will there be marijuana retailers in medical service districts? That would be at the Burbank, the old Burbank location. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? One in opposition. Will there be marijuana retailers in neighborhood business districts? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
No, sorry.
One in opposition? Neighborhood business
I'm going to
district.
abstain on this one. I'm
Oh, I
undecided on
understand.
C.
I'll vote against it. You can
So-
abstain.
Yes or no? Are you going to take a no?
I'll say no.
Okay, so that's
There's
2
two
for
no.
no.
It was 2
Nine.
no's?
Right,
No.
2.
You're a no?
Right.
8-2?
What is?
Will there be marijuana retailers in central business districts with the Main Street exclusion?
Speaking on that,
Yes, Counselor Di Natale.
I recall at the hearing, the chief and Mr. Skorsky talking about the concern being primarily centered around Blossom Street up through the Upper Common because of visibility, density, lighting, all that stuff. So where I was coming from with that, not respecting the fact that there is commercial centers beyond the Blossom Street area down on Moran Square and the Water Street area, my intention was not to exclude those areas. The chief specifically mentioned the concern from Blossom to the Upper Common, and that is where I wanted to have the restriction, from Blossom to the Upper Common, and leave the area around Moran Square, Lower Main Street, and the Water Street District alone, let it allowed. Just restrict it between Blossom and the Upper Common. That was my intent when I made that motion that I was not clear on. So I would not be in favor of restricting it all of the Main Street Business District. I would only be in favor of restricting it from Blossom Street up through the Upper Common.
Counselor Caddy.
So my memory was that we also excluded Mill Street and Boulder Drive the same distance from Blossom to the Upper Carbon. I believe that's how we settled the central business district.
Correct.
That was my intent.
Right.
My intent was not to count
And I
Water
would,
Street and...
I would support it as we voted on it or talked about it last week. Leaving the Blossom Street west all the way to Lunenburg Street and Summer Street.
Okay.
Counselor Squalia.
So, are we talking about going, including the entire Upper Common? Because is the Upper Common have a visibility concern, like from Blossom to, I don't know, Central Street, for example? Or does the Upper Common also have, or is the Upper Common have a good visibility, like we're talking about the Moran Square area has? I would say that the Upper Common has a good visibility as well. And when it comes to the Mill Street area, the areas in Boulder Drive is an industrial area, correct? Industrially zoned, so that wouldn't have been included in the central business district surrounding Main Street, correct?
Correct.
And that's why we have it shown in green here on our map. Thank you.
Correct.
Counselor Donley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just hate to see politicians get in the way. If a retailer wants to come in and try and sell something that's legal in the state and in the city, and politicians are saying to the retailer, no, you can't do it. I mean, the part that's being excluded is the part of Main Street that needs the most help. To me, I understand it's planning and politics. I don't know if it's people's philosophy or religion or what it is that is preventing something that's been voted on by the people in the state of Massachusetts. The part of Main Street that needs the most financial help, if a retailer wants to come in and fix a building and bring it up to code, politicians are saying no. So I would like to see it opened up in the city and let our rules and regulation, our zoning, our planning, our building codes and Board of Health codes that all are in effect today. Let someone come in and fix a building up and make it vibrant. Bring people downtown that are going to have some money and spend it, and hopefully somebody else will do it when they see rejuvenation. But I just hate to see politicians just say, no, that's not a good idea on Main Street. That's not a good idea in Fitchburg. That's what we've seen for 30 years. That's all I have to say.
So I take exception to that. Politician is a dirty word. I know that is what I am. But as always, I don't need a lecture on history in this city. This city's been managed into the toilet for 35, 40 years, most of which I wasn't a part of. That's number one. Number two, politicians by law have to establish zoning rules. Okay? There's a lot of things politicians do that the business community doesn't like. Okay? Number three, we were told a couple weeks ago that we weren't soliciting enough of advice from the subject matter experts, the police chief, the attorneys, the economic development office, and I came into defense of this council saying we are certainly taking their testimony into play here. So for the public's own edification, because I myself will probably get lambasted by the usual trolls on social media, the restriction from Blossom Street to wherever the point is on downtown that isn't as visible and well lit is where I would like to restrict this. Not Marcus Di Natale, who, by the way, since day one has been all for expansion of licenses beyond the minimum and expanding it to all these green sections you see here, not what the planning board wanted, not what the attorneys wanted. Okay, so I will speak for myself in saying I would like to think because of my efforts, this is expanded by leaps and bounds and the licenses. But the police chief in particular was adamant about placing it in those sections of downtown. And I take his testimony and his 30 years of public safety experience at face value. Now, if the citizens of this city are going to get mad about that, so be it. I would like to show them a map of what the regulations were for zoning, what the planning board recommended, and then what this council voted on. And you'll see, from start to finish, the green expansion is tremendously large. So because of this council, because of politicians, we opened this place up to a lot of places in the city of Fitchburg. And, by the way, doubled the number of licenses allowed. Now, there are some out there who aren't pleased with that because they want it everywhere. Heck, they want it sold next to a daycare for all they care. We can't do that because there's a segment of the population that has told us they don't want that. So we have to take the 43% into account. But again, my amendment to restrict it from Blossom to, I guess the point would be after City Hall and the theater block, is where you would start to see it more opened up. That is purely based on the police chief and the police department's testimony. And it had sound logic attached to it, and I am not one. I think a politician would I think a true politician would ignore the police chief's recommendation and say, let's do it anyway. So I'm going to lose support over that, but I'm sticking with the police department. They know better than I do. And to me, that's not being a politician. That's being smart. So my recommendation was Blossom Street up through, how do you delineate this? You get to the upper common area around that section, that mural section after the theater block, where it starts to open up.
Would either be Central Street there, Counselor?
Yes.
That's that small...
That's small right before Workers' Credit Union.
So I would say Central Street and to the west?
Right.
And Blossom Street and to the east?
Right.
And then I
Yes.
would make sure we were clear, as we have here, to the north of, permitting, though, the north of, I'm sorry, excluding all those areas that to the north of the railroad track, or the alternative would be to permit south of the railroad track.
Yes, that was my intent. And,
Okay.
and I cannot stress enough,
Okay.
based on the police chief's testimony, not because I myself want it to be that way.
Okay. I can write that.
And the Community Development Office, and the attorneys, and input I got from the public. So, just want to emphasize that. Thank you.
Councilor Caddy.
So I'm not upset with what Counselor Donnelly said at all, because he's absolutely right. But what we're doing, it's the art of compromise. Like, I do think we stuck our necks out a little bit on this. We went farther than I thought the council would, but he's right. And so, this compromise in this vote doesn't mean a year from now, 2 years from now, when the unknowns are known, we may open it up to Main Street. But right now, we are putting $75 million into that part of Main Street. To me, let's just hold on. I think we did a good job with this. I don't see any reason for anybody to be upset. We're doing fine. We're doing fine. Thank you.
Councilor Zarella.
I agree with what Councilor Gianatali has been saying. I would just ask that since the chief just walked back into the room, I'd like to solicit his opinion on how far up the common he had initially intended his remarks to apply to.
East of Blossom.
Certainly. Welcome, Chief Martin.
Good evening. Sorry I had other police matters going on out in the hallway, so I missed part of that debate.
So our discussion was how far up with your recommendation when we heard the first time about excluding Main Street as part of the central business district for allowing marijuana retailers. The discussion is now, when does that start and when does that stop for the exclusion? And what we had possibly decided on was that Blossom up to where would be the exclusion where you wouldn't be able to do a marijuana retailer right now in that location.
The intent behind my comments was to prohibit it from the dense parts of Main Street, being from the corner of Blossom and Main, all the way up through the post office in the upper common. That is some of the greatest density areas on our Main Street, which is going to create problems for us in the enforcement world, or keeping an eye on these businesses, to making sure that they're being run properly. So my intent was just that small district from Blossom to the Upper Common. As I walked in, I heard comments about Central Street and some other locations. Keep in mind, once you get off of Main Street, there's going to be other hurdles that one would have to jump to even open a place, because they're going to be in proximity to either schools, residentials, daycare, so there's going to be a lot of other challenges. But specifically, my intent was the Main Street area, specifically Blossom through the post office and around the Upper Common.
So that would be Blossom to Mechanic,
Yes.
and then,
Back, I envision wrapping it back down Boulder Drive and keeping it right there in that central business district, making that prohibitive use in that specific area. So Main Street, Upper Common, back down, Boulder Drive, Cushing Street, up, I believe it's Cushing, where, Cushing, and then back up to Main and Blossom.
would you include or exclude Mill Street?
I would definitely include it in the restricted area.
Okay, so to be in,
That would.
part of the Main Street exclusion would include Mill Street?
Exactly, and
Okay.
as I stated, Boulder Drive, coming down Boulder Drive, and then looping back around to Main Street.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask
Counsel-
a question, please?
No, Counselor Squalia?
Okay, so right now, we're talking about, for the chief, from Blossom Street up to the post office area of the Upper Common, which, once you get past Academy Street in the Upper Common, towards the post office side, it's a residential district, so that wouldn't be allowed. But the commercial district, the CBD district, continues to the left side where, for example, the Boulder Cafe is, or the Boulder Art Gallery, and continues a little bit down Main Street. So if we're going only to the post office, it's stopping it at Academy Street, would that in effect, is that your intention? Or is the Upper Common where the Boulder Cafe or that?
I would include the Upper Common, Boulder Cafe, that small little district there, down to the former Sentinel Building. I would include all that, primarily because the lack of parking. There's not parking lots. It's going to be a tough area to have officers keep a visible eye on these establishments. It's going to pose a lot of security concerns from my perspective. So, as I stated, going up Main Street, do the loop around the Upper Common, and then coming down back Boulder Drive. That's the areas that I would request an exclusion for any retail sale.
Okay, so not past, like, for example, where Park Street is, as Main Street continues, that area you feel is visible and safe, just around the loop?
Park
Of
Street.
the,
31 North.
yeah, Park Street, School Street, Chestnut Street,
Okay, I'm good with that. Yes.
maybe, to.
I don't see a lot of areas up that would even possess the capability of having retail sale.
Right.
Because once again, it's going to have to go for special permit, and I'm going to have input on visibility, parking design, layout design. Like I said before, the biggest challenge is facing is Main Street because of the high buildings, the density, and the visibility issues. So, yes, Park Street, continue on Main Street, no objection.
So, I agree completely with Councilor Caddy in that this, Main Street, while, I would like to just open it up to all of Main Street. I agree that, with the chief's concerns and with the planning board's concerns, that this is a great compromise. We basically, like Councilor Di Natale said, allowed it everywhere in the city, almost, except for the dense concern, the area of concern on Main Street. Can I move to amend the subnote D of the Main Street exclusion to define the Main Street exclusion as the central business district from Blossom Street to Park Street?
Well,
Mechanic?
is it Park up to Mechanic?
Park, I don't know, we can call it Caldwell Place? If you're looking at a map.
Counselor Di Natale? Yeah.
Okay, So, to try to make it more simplistic here, you start at Blossom Street, you go all the way up Main Street, you go around the Upper Common, and then it's like, it's the track for Longs Joe, is basically all it is. It's, you start at Blossom Street where Beamer's is, you go up the road, go around where the Boulder is, around the Upper Common, go past the Sentinel Building, down through Boulder Drive, then back up Cushing next to Beamer's, back to the Blossom Street starting point. It's the exact track
Of Longs Joe.
of Longs Joe.
Longs
So-
Joe goes to the Putnam Street, but, yes.
I'm sorry, yep, past Putnam Street. So it's
that loop.
It's that loop. It's that big circle of which Mill Street is included. Mill Street is included.
Yes.
So-
Okay, so if we refer to that as the Longs Joe Loop for this body, would we
It
be?
goes past that, though. It goes beyond
Or the
Putnam.
Main Street
Oh,
exclusion loop?
Okay. Okay, I think that when we take the vote on this, I think we all know where those boundaries will be when we vote on this
Yeah, I
as
think-
part of the Main Street exclusion.
Should we motion
So,
to
no-
define the Main Street exclusion?
Move to define Main Street exclusion as from Blossom Street, all the way up Main Street, around the Upper Common, down past Boulder Drive, back to Cushing, and which also includes Mill Street. That's the Main Street exclusion. That circle. That's my motion for that.
Okay, do I have a second on making that amendment? I have a motion and second to amend further definition of the Main Street exclusion now to include from Blossom up Main Street, around the Boulder, and back to Cushing.
Around the Upper Common. Not the Boulder, around the Upper Common.
Okay, Upper Common.
Down Boulder, left on Cushing.
Long Joe used to go up Cushing Street.
Okay, so I have a motion and second to accept the new definition of what's going to include our Main Street exclusion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Now, I still have, and Counselor DiNatale, was that going to be your point on your next speaking point?
Which is?
I don't know, I have a couple more counselors who would like
No,
to
no, I'm
speak on
done.
that.
I'm
Are you
done.
good?
I'm right
Okay.
now.
Counselor Boishman?
No, the chief answered my question. I'm gonna let him off the hook for now.
Okay, good. We'll make a note of that. And Counselor Zarella?
I was just going to ask, because it had come up in discussion earlier, whether, in the chief's view, we're talking about it as central business district minus this Main Street exclusion. Half of Boulder Drive is not central business district. Half of it is central business, the other half is industrial. So,
One side of it is.
right, that's what I mean, half down the middle.
Right.
So, do you have the same concerns regarding the far side of Boulder Drive where the current City Hall building is, or?
Based on the
Okay.
totality of everything that's happening on Main Street, once again, Councilor Caddy made the point that this is a great compromise. Based on the amount of infrastructure that's being put into downtown, I think this is a fair compromise, and I believe that Boulder Drive also poses challenges that we're gonna face on Main Street. And like I said, this is a beginning stage. I'd just like to relay to the councils, I was in Boston today where they, at a meeting with Massachusetts major city chiefs, and our city is far ahead other communities, so that has something to say about this council and where we're going with this. But the restrictions that I'm asking for, I think, is a great compromise on that singular loop.
Okay, and Mr. Sikorsky, is that half of Boulder Drive, I know you've got the map there, is that industrial or light industrial? I don't recall.
So
That's industrial.
it's sort of, yeah, I mean, and it's sort of immaterial in that it would be included either way.
Right, no, I know, we've got two separate items here. I was going to move that we amend item E before voting on it to exclude Boulder Drive at the recommendation of the chief.
Up to Cushing Street.
Up to Cushing Street, yes.
I think that we might get a chance to get there, but I would like to take the vote on item D now. where
Oh,
we
yes,
have-
I'm sorry, I
Okay.
forgot the previous vote didn't
all right.
actually decide the matter.
Well, we haven't, we defined it, but we haven't taken a vote. So, back to the vote, will there be marijuana retailers in Central Business District with the Main Street exclusion, which we have further defined? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? One in opposition? All right, moving on. Will there be marijuana retailers in industrial zones?
Yes.
Counselor
Could you
Clark?
just read that again, please?
Sure. Will there be marijuana retailers in industrial zones? Speaking to the motion, Counselor Zarella.
I would like to, based on the discussion we just had with Chief Martineau, I would like to suggest and move that we exclude Boulder Drive up to Cushing Street insofar as it falls within the industrial zone.
It's already part of the exclusion.
Well, no, the central business district that contains the Main Street.
Okay, so exclude.
Industrial has no
Those are a fair description of the end of a zone.
Okay, do we have the right term on that then? So we want to exclude.
This is E, industrial, excluding Boulder
The
Drive.
intersection.
Okay. Boulder to Cushing,
It's gonna
okay.
include,
Right, exactly.
that includes up Mechanic, up Prospect.
Okay, Counselor, are you done with that?
Well, I'm making a motion on it.
They're looking to permit in
I'm
this.
hoping I
Okay.
can get a second. but-
Second.
Thank you.
So we have to,
Okay.
You're approving
I
industrial
guess, to
areas
the
except
intersection of
Boulder Drive.
Mechanic,
Is that your
Prospect.
Yes.
I don't know how to, then you guys will just draw it on a map and then at the
Counselor-
end of it.
Okay, Counselors. Counselor Boishman, and then I'll get to you.
On the industrial,
Mhm.
let me ask a question. This really affects my ward. I got Seaboard, I got Antwell Shoe, I got the old former D. Johns, I got the Fitchburg Engineering. I got all those industrial buildings on my lower Clegon, and I call that a neighborhood. So if I vote yes on this industrial, would that allow them to set up shop in my ward, in that ward, down there?
It depends. Later on, we're gonna vote about whether or not you have certain setbacks in that area. Okay? In all these areas, whether it be 300 feet and whether or not that be waived. So, in some of those areas you described are gonna be close to residential areas. So you
Yeah,
have,
because Revolutionary already got a special permit, and the buffer zone is already shorter than 300 feet.
right.
Am I right, Pollock? So, I already know that they're already coming in front of us for a host agreement, so they can cultivate adult entertainment fund. But they're not gonna distribute, they gave me their word, they're not gonna sell it. And yeah, well, they're gonna sell it out. But what ends up happening, if they decide to sell it there, if they come back in front of you guys, and I'm not a counselor, and they say, we already got the buffer, you allowed it already, and now we want piece of the pie. We think that the thing's gonna take off, and we got plenty of parking. So parking's not the issue, visibility's not the issue, but the neighborhood is the issue.
So I think the question would be, how would the then planning board exercise its discretion if it's gonna waive certain of these restrictions? Because I still think we're talking about an area that might be excluded because it would be 300 feet of residential areas, but, because of the development that happened in that property, near that property. But then again, if it's not excluded by those buffers, they could get a special permit depending on if they meet the other criteria that's set out in the ordinance that's before you.
I just want to make it clear, I'm in favor of this recreational, even though I didn't vote for it, but I don't want to see it in neighborhoods. I said it from day one, I do not want it in neighborhoods. Keeping in the business district and everything else, yeah, I understand that, I've read that. But we can change the rules. The rules can be changed anytime.
Right.
There's an old saying we have, money talks, and you know what walks. So,
Rules?
Counselor Boishman, do you mind if I move on to the other counselors?
what's that?
Do you mind if I move on to the other
Yes,
counselors?
you can, ma'am.
Thank you. Counselor Squalia?
I do not support the proposed amendment to E industrial on Boulder Drive. I think that we discussed it at the last meeting very clearly, that Main Street, Central Business District would be excluded, and to include Boulder Drive, the industrial area around Boulder Drive, we're further complicating the issue. The visibility around you could spot pick any street and pick out visibility concerns, but our main concern was Main Street, of which that's where we've been going really with all of our all of our planning. So I do not support the amendment to include industrial area around Boulder Drive.
Counselor Di Natale?
So when we just discussed the exclusion of the Main Street Central Business District, we talked about Boulder Drive going down to Cushing Street. Not to further confuse the matter, I can't imagine people at home watching this and following it, because sometimes I'm not. I can't believe how convoluted this has gotten. Are we only talking about, when we talk about Main Street Central Business Exclusion Area, the left side of Boulder Drive? Because the right side is the industrial piece. That's the Putnam building, that's the old GE building, where River Styx is, the Register of Deeds, the current City Hall.
Can't go in there.
So I just want to make sure that the Main Street exclusion that we voted on, when we talked about it going down Boulder Drive to Cushing, it was not inclusive of the right side of that street. It was only inclusive of the left side.
That's correct.
That's correct. So then I would not support the motion. That is an industrial building. On that side of the road. I wouldn't support that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Counselor Walsh?
Yeah, I would just like to get the chief's views on the motion that was made to include that part of Boulder Drive, if that's what you intended when you included Boulder Drive as part of that
I never
central
took
business
into
district.
consideration the current Boulder Drive facility where River Styx is and City Hall. That never came into contention because, quite frankly, it's within 300 feet of the library anyways. It would require special permitting, and it would require another evening of lengthy discussion. My concern was the Main Street corridor, left and right of Main Street. I don't foresee it going into the River Styx complex down there because there's a lot of hurdles to accomplish there, so that's not part of the conversation. The conversation truly was Main Street and because of the density of Main Street.
Thank you. Counselor Caddy?
So what I'm having trouble with is, we're gonna allow growers to be in industrial areas, but we may not allow a recreational marijuana facility to go in with that grower. To me, that doesn't sit right with me. I know Councilor Boschman's concerns, but if you're gonna have a grower right there, I don't see what the problem would be. So what I'm saying, basically, is allowing them in industrial areas.
Okay, we'll be taking up a vote on that. All right, any other comment from counselors before we, Counselor Boschman?
I just want to point out one thing, when we talked about Putnam Place and that, the way I understand the law, that Putnam Place gets grants from the U.S. government and the federal government, and the chief can quote me on this, I believe they're against marijuana and all that. So they couldn't put a place in Putnam Place because they get grants from the federal government. So the government's not going to say, yeah, go ahead, you can stop manufacturing, we're going to support you, and all of a sudden Donald Trump is saying, we're totally against it, or Mr. Shepherd says we're against it, and we're going to prosecute. I mean, I don't see that. I don't understand why we're having a big trouble here on this. I just, I don't understand this. We're making a big thing out of nothing here.
Right, so if it's not going to allow it there anyway, why not just allow it within our guidelines here and let the special permit process take hold?
Counselor Zarella?
Okay, so just to further clarify then, because it is a little bit confusing exactly where the zoning lines fall, and I don't have my zoning map here. The section that the chief specifically talked about, the area like up near DeBonis and so forth, is technically on the other side of Boulder Drive. Is that still within the central business district, or is that also zoned industrial?
Central Business District.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I will withdraw my proposed amendment.
All right, thank you for that. So now we will be taking a vote. Will there be marijuana retailers in industrial zones? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? One in opposition.
One against?
All right. Will there be marijuana retailers in light industrial zones?
a motion for yes.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and second. So the vote will be, will there be marijuana realtors in light industrial zones? All those in favor?
Aye.
Speaking to the motion, Counselor
Can I
Boishman.
have Tom show me on the map there where the light industrial zones are? Because if they're in the lower Clegon area, that's a poor section of town. What are we doing here?
That's an
Same
industrial.
thing, huh?
That's industrial.
That's industrial, lower Clegon?
Look at these maps before we have them on.
It's been manufacturing for how many years?
Limited industrial, and that's the color you're looking for, Counselor.
Light
Industrial, limited industrial. It's your primary areas.
My area.
You've got a small area here, sir.
All right, that's okay, go ahead.
All right, so we will be taking the vote. All those in favor of marijuana retailers being in light industrial zones, aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on, is it the intention of the council that there be marijuana retailers south of the railroad tracks in the CBD, Central Business District, that includes Main Street?
I'm going to suggest that, two things, Madam President. Your body has already addressed this footnote number 4 in our previous discussion regarding item 3D.
Okay.
When you clearly define for us the exclusion in the Main Street area. I just would ask, I know that the chairman for the planning board, chairwoman for the planning board is seeking to be recognized on that issue.
Okay.
And,
Right. President Karen, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I know there's a lot of discussion on like the central business and the industrial, and I was with the medical services district. You know, we didn't get any input from the police chief, at least in that regard, but that was one of the concerns for the exclusions because it is extremely remote and not be able to be policed. Also, medical marijuana is not allowed there. So by allowing retail marijuana in the medical services district, it just doesn't balance, let's just say, because it's a retail use, but it's not medical use in that, particular application. And it's a highly restricted zone for a lot of activities beyond industrial, not equivalent to like industrial, light industrial types uses.
All right, and that is the
Reason for saying that, out of all the areas in the city where it should go with the limited number of licenses that are available, that have it more generally go in some of those other directions.
All right, and would you like the chief to address that specifically? That would be the old Burbank Hospital site, correct? Up on the hill?
Yes.
Chief?
Where it doesn't allow for medical retail sale, I would be opposed to recreational sale as well because of the specific clientele that respond to that part of the city looking for medical needs. So I would have a hard time supporting a recreational use, especially where it doesn't allow it for medical use.
Thank you, Councilor Di Natale.
Make a motion to amend to exclude MSD.
We've already voted on this, didn't we?
We did, and now I'm asking that we amend it to exclude it.
Second.
I have a motion and second to amend exclusion of MSD, which are medical service districts. All those speaking to the motion? Okay.
Just briefly, I don't mean to be pedantic or anything, but for the sake of rules, propriety, and whatnot, we would need that in the form of a motion for reconsideration, because it was previously voted on.
Thank you for that
But
clarification.
someone who was in the majority on the previous motion can make that.
Move to reconsider medical services.
Second.
I have a motion and second for reconsideration, but I'd like to hear from Councilor Donnelly first.
The medical area is only owned by one organization. Highly unlikely you're protecting yourself from one organization owns all of that medical land. Highly unlikely they would do retail. And questionable if they would do medical, but it's only one designation in the city, correct?
Yes.
by Health Alliance.
And my
No retail-
clarification
No
from,
retailer's gonna go in there anyway.
from Paula Karen would be that, would you support us then reconsidering the vote that we took previously to exclude medical services as being allowed as a marijuana retailer?
I'd like to vote reconsider to exclude it.
Okay, thank you. So I have a motion and second for reconsideration of footnote 3, section B, that would allow medical retailers in medical service districts. So vote for reconsideration. All those in favor of excluding,
Just vote on the reconsideration.
oh, we're voting on the reconsideration first. So all those in favor of reconsideration?
Aye.
All those opposed? None opposed. So do I have a motion?
Move to restrict MSD.
Second.
Exclude MSD.
Okay. So I have a motion and second to exclude marijuana retailers being allowed to operate in medical service districts. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Good, unanimous.
Councilors, if I could ask you to flip a couple of pages, 3 pages, actually. I'm going to draw your attention to it now, footnote number 8. We all identified that there was going to be a 300-foot barrier amongst a variety of uses. I won't re-describe at this point in time. The question came up in the drafting of this from some councilors as to whether or not this distance buffer of 300 feet could be waived by the planning board to a shorter distance if they determine that there has other adequate buffered area is, to a shorter distance provided it is adequately buffered, and it will suffice to meet the objectives under this section. So the question is, you want to approve an ordinance where the 300 feet buffer area could be reduced?
Okay. And you're number 2, Counselor Zarella.
3 issues. One, I'd just like, since we just voted on the MSD, I would like to point out that there are 2 or 3 other locations in which the MSD. Okay. All right. The second thing, the buffer that's under consideration, I'd like to suggest that we add language, because I know how special permits work at the zoning and planning board. It's a permissive grant. In other words, you should be granting it unless you can prove that you shouldn't. I would like to see language expressly creating a presumption of invalidity for any reduction of the buffer zone, such that the burden is on the petitioner to prove that it is in keeping with the purposes of the ordinance. Because otherwise, you can run into situations where the petitioner says, well, you should have approved it because there wasn't evidence on the record showing that it was a bad idea. And we don't, if we want to have this 300-foot buffer next to schools and whatnot, we don't want petitioners coming in and being able to say, well, unless you can show me that it's a bad idea, I get to do this.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up. Counselor Di Natale?
So you're asking this because there are instances where we have allowed this use, but because of the 300 feet, I'm going to use 2 examples. The South Street area, as well as Twin City Plaza, and some of the neighborhood business districts, a lot of the neighborhood business districts. I know South Street is a neighborhood business district. You wouldn't think it is, but it is, because there are houses that abut that street. At first, I was concerned about the waiver piece of this, because what you're asking is, are we going to allow the planning board any leniency in that buffer? It's 300 feet at least or more, no exception. The ordinance as drafted allows them to be lenient in certain circumstances where they can waive that 300 feet, and if it's only 100 feet, they'll allow it. At first, I was concerned about that, but then when I looked at the map last night and I saw that there are so many commercial areas that border homes where this could be impacted, it's a case-by-case basis through the special permit review. I looked at one particular area, in this case where the Sherwin-Williams is, Singapore, that plaza stretch there, where Planet Fitness is, that stretch, that is a allowed use area. Town and Country Apartment Houses is right behind it. There's obviously a barrier that separates the two properties. There's a big fence between the two. So in that specific case, I can understand why we may want to have a waiver in there on a case-by-case basis, because that is a business area where there's nothing but retail, bordering a residential area, but there is a barrier that separates the two zones. So there might be instances like that where we would allow it, even though it's within 300 feet of a residential area, because it's a commercial district spot. It's where all the retail is. So when reading the ordinance, it's a case-by-case basis through special permit review. In cases like that, I think there needs to be some latitude. We've already done our part in restricting this to all rural residential and residential zoned areas, and we have adequate buffers for certain locations. But in the locations like the South Street and the Twin City Plaza, I think that those are cases where there might be exceptions made because of the uniqueness of where they're located and the fact that there is a delineating line in terms of security where there's a large fence that separates the two parcels. And it's wide open, it's got a lot of lighting, but it borders a residential area. I mean, that I could see on a case-by-case basis, there being some latitude. But, there's only a couple instances I can see that. So I would be okay with the waiver staying as is, just my own 2 cents, because if we don't allow them to have that waiver, then they wouldn't be able to put a place up like in the Twin City Plaza. And that makes no sense to me. So I think there should be a waiver in there on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
So the footnote asks if we want that waiver in place still. My suggestion is to keep it as written in the ordinance, that the waiver be allowed in there still.
Right, and we do have 5 footnotes that we will be taking one by one
Okay.
with the vote. All right. Yes.
Could I just ask
Karen.
for the clarification? And mostly is for residential, but whether or not you still want to consider like middle of the road is more for residential or also for schools as well to be able to be reduced? Just that, most of the point for the 300-foot was residential because it was taken from the medical ordinance, which was in the industrial area, which there really weren't any schools. It was really the residential concern that we had about setbacks and buffering. But whether or not you want to say that we can reduce it.
This is like peeling back the
I
onion.
know. We just want to be clear on what the intention.
Okay, well, obviously I don't want it next to a school. I'm talking me, as one vote. I don't want any exceptions for schools or playgrounds, but again, it's a case-by-case basis. In the cases that I indicated, there is no such areas like that. It's just residential. So,
A middle-of-the-road approach would I've seen some approach it as is keeping it as a straight setback towards like the schools and then allowing it to be reduced for other types of uses.
Attorney Pusateri, would you like to jump in?
Just as a counter viewpoint, an example where we had a place where children might congregate would be at the, on Airport Road for the 25 Newport Street facility, which is a host agreement that this council has already approved. That was another example of, like, Attorney Di Natale, how about that? You just got a raise. Councilor Di Natale raised that had a clear buffer in between the actual property at 25 Newport Street and the place where the children might congregate, even though that was just cultivation, wasn't distribution. And then I would just suggest, instead of tasking this council with picking and choosing winners as to who's going to get the 300-foot buffer, we really have great appointments on the planning board, and you're going to control that as this body moves forward, and they're going to be able to identify each and every one of those issues, determine whether to waive it or not. So to leave it as more general will give the city the most flexibility.
Thank you. Councilor Zarella.
I just want to stress I am not opposed to leaving a waiver in there. I think there should be a waiver on a case-by-case basis. My only point is, and I'm sure Madam Chairwoman will understand what I mean, I would like to see it analyzed under a standard more similar to that of a variance than that of a special permit for reduction of the buffer. In other words, there should be a presumption that you don't get to reduce the buffer. And if you can prove good reason why you should, why your situation is somehow unique, like what Councillor Di Natale was saying about the Singapore area, where there's very clearly a situation that the ordinance didn't contemplate, then you get the waiver. I'm concerned more from the standpoint of thinking of this from an appealability standpoint. You know, the board makes a decision, petitioner doesn't like it, they take it to court. I'm looking to make sure that those decisions can't be easily overturned.
Thank you. Councillor Squalia.
I believe that the planning board should have the authority to waive the 300-foot buffer in an appropriate case. And the definition, in 5A, as noted, the distance requirement may be reduced by the planning board, provided that the ME will employ adequate measures to prevent product diversion to minors, and the planning board determines that a shorter distance, adequately buffered, will suffice to accomplish the objectives set forth. I feel that wording is appropriate, and I will vote in favor of this.
Councillor Zarella?
I'd just like to say I agree, that's good wording, but attorneys Pusateri and Tree can correct me if I'm wrong, but given that this is a special permit, there's sort of some background standards of proof and of decision that aren't in this language because they're elsewhere in the zoning ordinance and in the zoning statute. That's what I'm trying to draft around. It's not that I don't think the language here is good. It's just that because it's a special permit, there's a presumption essentially that you get it, unless it would be the planning board that would have to articulate, well, you don't get it because this, and this, as opposed to the petitioner having to say, yeah, I know I don't normally get it, but I should get it because there are these unique circumstances that make my case different from all these other cases.
Attorney Tree has some...
Okay, so my suggestion would be, footnote 8's vote would read, should the planning board have the authority to waive the 300-foot buffer in the appropriate case, provided the applicant meets a sufficient burden of proof, and then I would tackle the language on what the sufficient burden of proof would be.
Sounds good to me.
Yep. Attorney Tree, do you have anything else to add to that?
Listening to the counselors, legislating on the fly. I would add to 181.656, sub A. The distance requirement is presumed to be appropriate, period. However, the distance requirement may be reduced by the planning board, provided the applicant demonstrates by clear and convincing evidence that the ME will employ, and then go on to the language in there. To answer Councillor Zarella's question, any special permit is subject to the underlying requirements for the issuance of a special permit, which President Karen can certainly outline very completely to you. But the nature of a special permit, the nature of the planning board is to be permissive. There has to be a good reason to deny, and concern that the standard is appropriate is one of the issues that we did have in drafting.
Okay, so thank you for that. So when we do all the provisions to this nice big packet, the wording that you used will be included in the 161.5A portion of it? Okay. All right. If all have been heard, I think I'd like to move forward with the vote, so...
Move to amend 5A to include Assistant Solicitor Tree's amendments.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and second to approve the new language from Attorney Tree in Section 5A of this amended ordinance.
Section 5A of 181.656.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We will now take the vote. Should the planning board have the authority to waive the 300-foot buffer in the appropriate case? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Good. Okay. Vote number 2. What, if any, factors would the council consider important for the planning board to consider to ensure the public safety of the MR, marijuana retailers? Does the counselor approve the factors as listed herein? And Attorney Pusteri, can you direct us on where specifically would find that?
Sure, on paragraph 8 on that page. Facility will not place an undue burden on public safety services for the city. As may be adequately supplied, the planning board shall consider all facilities' lighting, whether or not all of the facility is visible from the public way, whether or not the parking is contiguous with the facility, or the parking arrangements are capable of being monitored by the applicant or the city, and whether or not the facility can be set up to promote the effective police department, to promote the effective policing, I should say, by department patrols, as well as other factors affecting public safety. So we've just identified factors, we conferred with the chief, we'd ask you just to approve that. I think it was consistent with what you have already recommended.
Okay, any further discussion? Right, so we will be voting on whether the council approves the factors listed herein. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Footnote number 10, change recommended by the planning board.
Let's skip that one. Madam President, if I could call your attention to footnote 11.
Okay.
This would be the same issue you had with the 300-foot buffer with the 1,000-foot buffer. Also, if I might, we would also in this motion be adopting proposed changes that were articulated by the planning board chair earlier this evening to strike the word property line and insert in its place structure, and to add the additional exception. I think I gave Councilor Di Natale a copy of my email.
Right, it was...
She could readdress that if we would like her to do at this time.
Establishment to establishment would be the 1,000 feet, and strike property line and strike adequately?
Adequately buffered.
Adequately buffered. And then what was that additional language, Paula?
About exempting the medical dispensaries?
Yes, and then there would be another specific exemption for currently existing medical dispensaries.
Okay, and all that's going to be included in our new amended language to include all of that?
It would be, right, with your approval.
Make a motion to accept those amendments?
Okay. And speaking to the motion, Councilor Di Natale.
So is the process involved tonight, we going to vote on a first reading?
I believe, yes, first reading as amended. Well,
I'll be honest with you, I don't feel comfortable voting on a first reading. After what we just went through right now, I'd like to read the draft form after what we came up with and then vote on a first reading.
all right, I believe
But
that...
I'm just making sure that we don't have to vote on a first reading, because if we do, I may not support this, because I want to read the ordinance after all this jargon has been amended. We've amended a lot of stuff here tonight.
Right, and I do think it's important that not only do we have an understanding of what this means, but that the public has an understanding
That's
of
another good point. 'cause,
what we're doing.
We are doing this on the fly. There's no other way to do it, obviously. We have to do it in an open meeting, of course. So is that true? We don't have to have a first reading vote tonight, right?
You do not have to have one.
We can hold it after we're done?
I believe that would be the thing, we table it or hold it,
I
or...
believe that we would have our clerk's office have to repost for a first reading.
And would it be, for bright terminology, would it be held or would it be tabled?
I would defer to the clerk, but I would, held or tabled to me would be indifferent. We could just take it off you could deny the first reading, and we could remark a new reading.
Okay.
I don't think you want to deny the first reading. I
Okay.
think that might put us down a road we don't want to go down.
Okay. So we could table
I
it then.
think we should table it.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, because we had, I want to say we voted on over 15 amendments here. And we have language in front of us that we're saying, okay, yeah, we're going to put, what's on this page, right? Or what she said, right? Or what he said, right? So I want to make sure, before we take a first reading, we get an amended copy with all this stuff we've done tonight. So we can sit back and take a deep breath, because this has been somewhat confusing, not in what the votes we've taken, but the process by which we're doing this. It's very, follow the bouncing ball. It's just so.
Right,
and I think there's going to be a clean version after this, where we're not taking any votes on anything that we've done tonight, other than the amendments.
Correct,
Okay,
right, and I do
that's
think that this is probably the best way to go about it, is line by line and ask each question.
I'm not questioning the process. There's no other way for us to do this. I'm clear on that, but I just want to make sure we're not, after we're all done, we're going to vote on a first reading. I want to see the reading amended before we vote on it first.
I think that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. All right, so here we are again with footnote 11. Should the planning board have the authority to waive the 1,000-foot buffer in the appropriate case? Speaking to the motion, Councilor Zarella.
I'm not as concerned about this one as about the other one, for obvious reasons. I just would like to note that if we choose to leave the language as is and not to insert the new language that we inserted into the 300-foot buffer, then for all intents and purposes, the 1,000-foot buffer is going to become rather illusory. It's going to be granted more often than it won't. So I sort of question the purpose of having a 1,000-foot buffer unless we insert that other language, even though I'm not hugely concerned about it.
And I think I'd like to hear from the chair, Ms. Karen, on that.
Regarding the 1,000-foot buffer, it is going to be, what's the difference in the criteria from 750 foot to 250 feet? It's really not clear what the objective is, to just say that it needs to be, we would just really want them clustered or not clustered to allow the city. Otherwise, to just keep firm to 1,000 feet or remove the 1,000 feet. It's really, unless you just want to maybe consider, I'm just trying to think of any criteria, density, like there's too many in one spot, why you wouldn't, but then again, it's not really defined as the reference point here for denial, okay? So I can't, if it's going to be difficult for the board, again, we're an approval, we're authority.
Exactly.
To say, how is one applicant different from another, and allowing one a reduction and one not a reduction when the criteria is not clear, unless you want to really speak to density or something like that.
Councilor Caddy?
I think the 1,000 feet came up early on when we had a very restricted area. Now that we've opened it up to the entire city, I don't think 1,000 feet, like you said, it doesn't have a purpose. If you had a dispensary across the street from a dispensary, I don't see a big deal in that. So I think 1,000 feet is much too restrictive.
The 1,000 feet was originally set up when we had specific areas where it was more to address that if one was located in one area, 1,000 feet would then preclude something and have to go to a different area, so you would get dispersion throughout the city.
And keep in
But
mind,
if that
we
is
all-
no longer really the goal or
And keep in mind, we only have 8 permits.
There's only 8 permits, so they
So-
could all, so acknowledge that they could all be clustered potentially, or you keep to 1,000 feet and really want to keep them further, throughout.
We only have 7.
Is it your recommendation then that you would like to keep the language as that, so that you as the planning board can make the decision about the 1,000 feet?
Well, we'd have to just, you'd have to add some language to kind of clarify how we would, and under what criteria we would allow the reduction. Again, is it a density issue? It's just not clear how we would allow the reduction. More often than we would probably allow it, since it's really not clear, so it's really why would have the 1,000 feet. What you want to speak for?
Councilor Di Natale?
So I think the statement that was made earlier is the 1,000 feet was in there initially because of the very restrictive sections that the planning board came up with. There was a spot here, a spot here, a spot here, a spot here, and that was it. So 1,000 foot at the time made sense. Now that we have opened it up to exponentially more areas, and I think with the 300-foot buffer and the criteria with that, as Council Zarella said, it kind of negates the need for the 1,000 feet, because the territory has been vastly expanded. I didn't consider that in the amendments we did 2 weeks ago, but there is sound logic behind it, not to say this council or I supports pot clustering or cannabis clustering, because I know there are other cities and towns in the Commonwealth that have said ordinances, like I know Worcester has one, Boston. So my only concern about the comment that, well, it's kind of negated because we've opened it up. Boston and Worcester are far bigger than we are, yet they have those kinds of buffers. So doesn't that run counter to that argument? Because they have a vast...
You could make a motion, sir, to strike paragraph 11 altogether.
No, but I'm saying, there are some in this room saying the 1,000 feet doesn't apply anymore.
Yes.
Yet these other cities and towns these other cities that are far larger than us do have such restrictions. So doesn't that run counter to the argument? Wouldn't they not have a buffer zone either then?
Some neighborhoods get inundated, so depending on like clustering, if like most of the, if it's too restricted where they can't site where setbacks from 300 feet and there's really only a few areas,
Yep.
then that could be a concentrated point, and maybe it is near a residential type of
Okay.
area, so.
And I guess I would also add that although we have opened it up for all intents and purposes for the city of Fitchburg, if we're to compare our commercial and industrial areas to those in Boston and Worcester, they have the luxury, you might say, to allow a buffer,
So they have a
but
lot more
still,
spots.
right.
Yeah.
It's just, they have more space to work with here.
Can I make a motion to exclude the portion that says 1,000 feet?
Paragraph 11.
Strike it. Yeah.
Do you want to completely strike, do you want me to read paragraph 11, or strike it?
Strike it.
Do you see it, Counselor Squalla? It is,
Oh, 11, if the application is for an MR.
yes, that. So I have a motion and second to strike section 11. Speaking to the motion, Counselor Zarella?
I seconded the motion because I have no really strong feelings on this particular provision, but I would like to point out that there are essentially, for the sake of debate, there are essentially three sensible routes we could go with this. We can strike it, we can remove the waiver so that it's just a flat 1,000 feet, period, or we can give some clear conditions for the planning board to follow, because I think what we're hearing from them is that it's not a matter of it doesn't make sense. It's a matter of we've given them such very vague conditions for when the 1,000 feet can be shortened that it doesn't allow them to actually say, yes, this is good, no, this is bad. So if we want to keep it, and if we also want to keep the waiver, we should have clear conditions on it. However, I'm okay with striking it altogether.
Counselor Walsh?
I guess I'm just confused as to, are we, is the 1,000 feet buffer was to reduce clustering? That's the reason. And so do we care about clustering? Or we don't care about clustering anymore?
Well, I'm wondering if the 300-foot now
will that
buffer, is that going to...
That's not between dispensaries, that's.
Right.
Right, because paragraph 11, I will just read paragraph 11 so that everybody knows what that says. If the application is for an MR, medical retailer, the MR is located at least 1,000 feet distant of a pre-existing MR. The distance under this section is measured in a straight line from the nearest point of the property line of the existing MR to the nearest point of the structure of the proposed MR. Counselor Di Natale?
So at the meeting we had where we made all these amendments, there was a gentleman who spoke from DiGeronimo Properties who was concerned about the fact in the initial proposal that that sector of South Street and Twin Cities, which was one of the allowed spots from the planning board's recommendation, there would be clustering there because it's only one spot out of 2 or 3 in the entire city. And he was concerned if you've had 5 or 6 of these businesses go right there and nowhere else, because there's only really 4 places they could go. So the buffer was put in for a reason like that, to avoid that type of clustering. Since we've opened it up exponentially, there's far more territory now for these places to go, which is why I'm more acceptable of getting rid of the restriction, because it made sense at that time because we were so restrictive in terms of where these places could go. Now that we've expanded the territory, that 1,000 feet almost gets negated. Now, I agree with Council Zarella, we can either strike the language and not have one, or we can keep it, period, no waiver. If we keep the waiver in there, then we have to tell the planning board, chapter and verse, what would constitute a waiver being granted. And I'm not prepared nor comfortable enough to come up with those tonight. So for me, it's either strike the language or keep it in there, period, and not have any waiver, so there's no gray area. This is just what it is, 1,000 feet apart from businesses. But the reason why I'm more susceptible to the striking of it is because the territory has been so vastly expanded that the clustering aspect of it is not as of concern now. It was in the start of that meeting because we had it in only 3 or 4 spots. Now you look at the map, it's everywhere. So I don't think the clustering would be as big of a concern now that we've expanded it. So I would err on the side of striking it and not keeping it. Because there's many more other items in this ordinance that have buffers, restrictions, requirements. So I don't want it lost on people that if we get rid of the 1,000 feet, we're okay with 7 businesses being in one street. That's not possible, but it's not practicable now that we've expanded the territory. Before it was, which is why we put it in there. And I didn't appreciate that again a couple weeks ago when we expanded it and said, well, wait a minute, now does the 1,000 feet make sense? So it sounds to me like it doesn't make as much sense considering we've expanded the territory exponentially. So I'm okay with striking it.
All right. Oh, Mary Jo Bohart, Economic Development Director. Hello.
Councilors. I just wanted to refresh memory. I'm glad you brought up Paul DiGeronimo, commercial property owner in the Twin Cities Plaza area. He spoke at the last meeting you all had. He brought up a very good point, and then I've spoken one-on-one with a variety of businesses. Some are commercial property owners, some are tenant businesses. So just because we've opened up so many different areas of our city where this use can now be, that doesn't mean that market forces being what they are, we could still have several, I'll just pick an area, along the John Fitch Highway, for example, or wherever. And some of the property owners were concerned that if there was clustering, it would create a brand or a theme. And that wasn't necessarily, at least at this early stage where we're all getting accustomed to this use, what they were comfortable with. So that's where some of them were very concerned that clustering could occur. And it was coming from market forces, and the spacing was business to business. And that's what I had heard.
So,
Councilor Dina
so I'm bouncing around like a ping pong ball right now. Because again, this is on the fly. This is all real time. I mean, no one said anything before. All everybody was saying was negate, negate, negate. And now we get the economic developer telling us, well, this is what the business community has told us. So, I mean, again, if that was under consideration, I would have considered that before I said, I'm okay with striking it. Now I'm saying, well, wait a minute. Even if we expand the territory, we can still have clustering. We can still have it. But, so, this is where I get really frustrated, and it's a little embarrassing, because people watching home are going, do these guys know what they're doing? And on the fly like this, we get different sets of testimonies from different stakeholders. It's another case of whatever we decide, it's not going to please everybody. So, for me, I know one thing I'm certain on. I don't want a waiver. Because, as Councilor Zarella said, if we have a waiver, we have to distinguish tooth and nail what that waiver would require, and I'm not prepared to go down that path. So for me, it's either have a 1,000-foot buffer, period, or not have one at all. Now, I know the motion made and seconded was to strike it, not have it. The other alternative is to keep the 1,000 feet and strike that paragraph A, allowing the waiver. I mean, I guess I'll leave it up to the rest of the council and further testimony before I make a final decision on this, but I could go either way on this. Where I don't want to go is have the waiver. I don't want to complicate things more further than we've already complicated them tonight, if you can believe that. So I will yield and listen to the rest of the group.
Attorney Pusateri.
I don't think we should think that anyone thinks that we don't know what we're doing. I think we know what we're doing more than just about anybody else in the Commonwealth. We are way ahead.
Not you, solicitor. I'm talking.
Including this council for acting as quickly as it has been going through the process. So I think
we know. I'm saying it's just trying to ping pong.
The
It's,
other
you know,
option that we would have here is to pass this with or without, and we could initiate something again in the planning department to take a look at whether or not we could provide the further detail of a buffer to prevent clustering, and to provide by a report from the planning board to the city council the list of conditions that the planning board would like to apply in determining whether or not they would waive that. So it would be it would be a very small zoning petition that would have to go through the process, but it would be able to be done in that option as well.
Thank you. Counselor Walsh.
I was going to voice my, I guess my approval of the zoning, the 1,000-foot, leaving that in place without any conditions, but I think in light of what Solicitor Pusateri has just said, I think I would retract that.
Counselor Caddy.
So, when you talk about clustering, we have 8 permits. Probably 3 to 4 to 5 are gonna go to the growers, which leaves us 3. I'm not really sure is anybody in this room really believe that we're gonna have a cluster of 2 on John Fitch Highway? A cluster of 2 on, I think we're reading way too into this. We have 8 permits in a city of 40,000 people. What's the clustering? Where are we gonna have 8 on John Fitch Highway? You know, I don't see it. Get rid of the 1,000 feet, open up to business. We've already decided we're gonna endorse this. Let's go with it. I can see we made some restrictions, but we've come a long way with this. Doing this, to me, doesn't make a lot of reason. Like, we're gonna reason that we're gonna have a cluster? I don't believe it. I just don't believe it.
Counselor Squalia.
A lot of the cities and towns, especially in, out west where they've been doing this, they do have distances between marijuana retailers for the clustering issue that, Ms. Bohart noted. And I would just like to suggest that we have another potential option besides striking it and all the other options noted. We could reduce the 1,000-foot buffer to 300 feet, for example, like we use between the schools without a waiver. That could be another option besides simply striking the buffer completely. And, there has been talk to me about a green light district, for example, in Fitchburg, which would be you might picture as a cluster of marijuana retailers, like our economic development director suggested, would, kind of be a place that businesses might want to start to cluster. And that might be some of the unintended consequences of, passing this legislation that, we were discussing before with the zoning. So I'm hesitant to strike the 1,000-foot buffer altogether, but reducing it to a 300-feet buffer without a waiver, that seems like a good first step and a good compromise.
Counselor Donley.
Thank you. Ms. Bohart, can you tell us where they could cluster right now? Can you give us 3 empty stores in one spot, 3 empty stores in another, just for an example?
Well, the South Street Wayland area is certainly an area where there could be clustering, and the John Fitch Highway. Those are areas where we have a kind of a more lengthy commercial zone. And so some of those owners were the ones that spoke to me, that's all.
I'm looking for 3 specific owners or 3 specific stores.
Well, I wouldn't be able
right
to
now.
give you 3 addresses or 3 owners on the fly, unfortunately, because
Well,
that's asking a lot.
To kind of address what Councilor Caddy just said, I don't believe they exist. We're trying to protect ourselves from something where, do you know where there's 3 stores open right now that would be potential?
Right, but
In more than one site, except for Main Street?
But we're not setting an ordinance today for...
Based on the vacancy
Based
of
on
now.
April 17th, 2018, but this is from here forward. And I think if a case were created where the highest and best use of a certain district had been defined over time by the market as being that of a marijuana retailer, then the market would essentially drive that clustering over time. And it might not happen overnight or in a year or in 2 years, but you could get yourself to a point where that clustering exists. And I think the question in front of the council really is, originally where we had this isolated number of districts, it was arbitrary, and to Councilor Donnelly's point, maybe a politician and a planner created clustering, and now we're looking at a market force-driven clustering. And if that's something you're in favor of, that's one question. But again, from the businesses we've spoken to, it's not something they're interested in, at least from what we've heard.
Councillor Bushman?
Question on the clustering. Wouldn't the marketplace take care of itself? I mean, it's almost like the grocery store. At one time, you had Heartland over here, you had First National over here, you had another store. Now what do we have in Fitchburg? You want to get two. You got Market Basket and the one on John Fitch Highway. At one time, we had 5 or 6 of them, and now we only get 2. So if you say clustering, wouldn't it be, you're going to go to the place where you get the best price? So if this one's got a sale over here, you're not going to go to hers, you're going to go to mine. So pretty soon, if she doesn't get any business, you're going to go out of business.
But, so I guess what I would say there is it's called an agglomeration economy. So I think a grocery store is a different matter because you go there for all of your groceries. You go shop in one instance, you go and get everything you need. But I think what you might want to think about is, maybe when you go and shop for an automobile and you have a stretch of dealerships where it's actually, there's a benefit to the producer to have that clustering. So when people go out and make a trip, you can do your side-by-side shopping, or what you might see in a mall, for example. I'm not necessarily suggesting that would be the case here, but I think that was the intent, that something like that could happen. So I would say it's distinctly different from a grocery store in this case.
Well, I'm sorry I used the wrong terminology. We use a package store. Same purpose. You don't see them right next door to one another. I wish you get a big retailer coming in who wants to put the mom and pop out of business.
Right.
I think at this point, we'll just move on.
Well, I'm
Councillor
just
Zabella?
asking a question.
Wait,
There's a motion
yes.
on the floor.
Motion on the floor.
Right, but I've got 2 councillors who want to speak. I'm going to hear from Councillor Fleming first, because she hasn't spoken, then we'll get to Councillor Zabella.
I have no problem with keeping the 1,000-foot buffer in there. This is a case of people wanting this, but not wanting it near them. And I think we need to spread it out, and I don't want the clustering. I don't want to see bar rooms everywhere. I don't want to see these establishments everywhere. I think we just need to spread it out through the city. And yes, we only have 7.68 now, but potentially we could have more. So I say keep it at 1,000 feet and make everybody happy. Because I don't want it near me. Would you want it near you, Councilor Caddy, right next door to your store? I mean, I just think it's just one of those cases that we all want it, but we don't want it near us.
Councillor Zarella?
I understand where Councillors Caddy and Donnelly are coming from. I do. That it's unlikely to be a problem based on just the realities of the situation on the ground. Where I'm coming from, I think we need to be deciding as a council, not do we think clustering will turn into a problem, but do we think that clustering, if it were to occur, would be a bad thing? Because if we don't think it's going to be a bad thing, then we should just strike the paragraph altogether. If we do think it's going to be a bad thing, but we just don't think it's going to happen, there's no harm in having the buffer zone there. It's just not going to be applied. But then it's there just in case something would otherwise happen. Again, I can see both sides of it. I honestly, if we were to take the vote this instant, I don't know which way I'm going on this. But I do think that the question boils down ultimately not to do we think there will be clustering, but rather, is clustering a thing that we do not want to see? Yes or no?
Counselor Caddy?
So, a couple things. So, planning board member Mike Hurley a couple weeks ago looks at me and goes, Joel, remember when we were kids and we walked down the hill? You could see Ray's Variety next to Dave's Variety. You could see Dave's Variety and Ray's Variety right next to each other. We had two variety stores right next to each other, and then across the street was Corvades Market. So there were three places all doing selling all the same candy bars, basically. So clustering. You mentioned my tile store. So
This way, this got corrected in my office.
there isn't a building within distance of my tile store that they can rent, and that's my point with a city. Counselor Donnelly touched on it. Can you tell me 3 empty storefronts right next to each other that isn't on Main Street, that you could have 3 potential marijuana dispensaries? The answer is no. And what if you had one next to another one? That's not a cluster. If you want to open a restaurant in this city, open it right next to the 99. You want to open a restaurant next to a restaurant. That's how you're going to do business. I don't see the problem. I really think we're reading too far into this.
Counselor Di Natale?
Problem since day one on this whole subject, everything we talk about, is we're trying a balancing act of trying to assuage the 43% versus the 57%, plus the business community that may not have voted, but they have a stake because they have commerce here. So, and then we have the public safety aspect. I hope that it's gathered from these meetings that, because the reason why this is so difficult in some cases, because we have multiple competing factors where there are concerns and there are not concerns, and we're trying our best to assuage everybody, and I think I can say for myself very safely, we're never going to accomplish that. We're going to upset some people, whether they're counselors or they're business owners or they're residents that have a stake in this. So there is a group that is advocating we don't have the buffer. There is a group that's advocating we have it, but maybe lessen it. So the way I'm coming with this is I think maybe the only compromise here is not so much lessening it, but maintaining it, but with the waiver restriction. And as the attorney stated earlier, there's going to be a list of conditions outlined for the planning board to review, like the 300-foot buffer, that would give them guidance as to whether it would warrant them waiving that 1,000 feet. And the only reason why I'm thinking about a compromise in this case in terms of keeping the waiver is, that way, it's not a hard and fast 1,000 feet, no exceptions. There's some leniency based on a certain set of criteria that the attorneys are going to have to draft for us, and we're going to have to review before we have a vote on a first reading. So it's been suggested tonight that we get rid of it. It's been suggested that we keep it but lessen it. And now I'm throwing a suggestion out there that we keep the 1,000, and we keep the waiver provision, but we have to delineate lines in the sand as to what would constitute a waiver being granted. I feel like that might be the best avenue, because it would satisfy the business community that has concerns. It would satisfy good points that are made. I'm not disagreeing with the 2 councils about clustering, in terms of, we're not saying it can't happen, we're saying it may happen under a certain set of criteria. I don't know how else to assuage both sides, because I don't want to upset the business community, because God knows, considering we have 23% of them here, we don't want to incentivize them to want to leave. And, some people at home may roll their eyes about that, but, this is the reality we face. There are people who have stakes in this city that are saying they have concerns. We can't just ignore that. So I'm trying to figure out how we can assuage both sides. As to the 1,000 feet, to me, I've always said from day one, it's an arbitrary number. How do I know if 1,000 feet is adequate, or it's 500 or 300? I don't know. What's adequate? I feel like it was a vague or just a subjective number that was thrown out there. So I think maybe the waiver needs to stay in. We just need to define what constitutes that waiver.
Are you done, Councilor Di Natale?
Well, I know there's a motion on the floor and seconded to strike the language. We still have to vote on that, but if that doesn't pass, then the council is saying we want a buffer. The question then becomes, do we want to buffer no restrictions, or do we want to buffer no exceptions, or do we want to buffer with exceptions?
My only question, this would be to Chair Karen, is could we ultimately change the language to say, should the planning board have the authority to waive the 1,000 feet buffer to eliminate or discourage clustering? Versus in the appropriate case, or then are we going to have to decide what the appropriate case is that you follow to waive the 1,000-foot buffer?
Just seeking clarity, so if the clarity is to not induce clustering, particularly say maybe where there's heavy residential area or something in proximity, then it could be language of something of like, considering density of maybe protected uses or adverse impacts on adjacent properties or density of existing MRs, so it's like, but again, how much is too much, but it's like what criteria, are we seeking not to have too many in one spot, ideally, or is, as a board member, we're just seeking clarity, whether it's a hard and fast number or, but if it's not, then what criteria would you, what is the goal? So that we're just making sure that we're doing it consistently and appropriately, pretty much, each, case by case, but it's, again, consistently with same type of information we're looking at.
Right, again, I was just trying to get to the resolve of by changing the language, that eliminates everybody's concerns, or are we still going to have to set conditions?
Criteria could be established, but it's seeking clarity from the council of what the intent is. Is it to avoid the clustering, or in only certain cases, or really to reduce residential impact? So if we have a clear goal of what to look at, yes, we can, the language could be written.
Right, we don't have any direction on that tonight, right? Attorney Pusateri.
So my recommendation, if I could please, would be to heed what Councilor Di Natale is saying, but we strike 11 because it's very cumbersome for this body to deal with it right now. And what I would do is I would file a petition that you would refer back to the planning board that would allow us a couple of weeks to figure out what would be the goal of a buffer, and then the planning board would be able to take that direction to articulate factors or circumstances that it would use to determine a waiver. We could come back with you with articulable basis for making a waiver, and it would be much easier for you to address. I think to Councilor Caddy and Councilor Donnelly's point, I don't see clustering happening like that. It's not going to happen overnight. So I think a couple weeks to at least put that small piece of this ordinance together. It's going to go a long way to economize the use of your time here tonight and to get us a more thoughtful approach on the 1,000-foot in the buffer.
Could I ask him a question?
Councilor Caddy.
Could we define a cluster? Is it 2? Is it 3?
Sure.
What's a cluster?
Sure.
All right.
And I think that if I was to get a petition in for you, you could send that referral in to the planning board, and I guess you could also provide either directly as a counselor or through the body generally some direction as to those types of issues.
Councilor Walsh. I'm sorry, Councilor Fleming, I'm sorry.
Just to clarify, what you're saying is strike this.
Yeah.
You're going to come back in 2 weeks when we do our first reading. Will it be included in our first reading?
No.
It would be...
In order to have an appropriate zoning ordinance, it would have to be referred to the planning board. So you guys won't labor over it. So it would economize your time while you're dealing with this issue. You would send it over to your subject matter experts. Paula would conduct a hearing. We have good minds on the planning board to handle these types of cases. They have similar training to Councilor Zarella. They will identify factors they think would be something you might want to consider, and then they would report back to you, and then you would review their report.
Okay.
So it wouldn't necessarily happen in 2 weeks that you'd have that language. But to Councilor Donnelly's point, Councilor Caddy's point, I don't think you have a time urgency on this particular issue.
So we can add it in later.
Absolutely. And I would initiate the process so it wouldn't be something that you would lose track of.
So just to be clear on that direction, then, we would, as a body, we would want definition of cluster and the goal of the buffer. Correct? Those were two things that I heard from the majority of the counselors that needed to be addressed on, if we're going to strike it, to add it back in, what the definition of a cluster is and the goal of that buffer.
That's what I heard too.
Okay, all right. Counselor Squalia?
Why would we strike this at all if the goal is to submit a petition to amend it anyway?
I think you're striving for the perfect, and you've got something very good with the first 10 paragraphs. I think you should pass it, have an ordinance on the books, and really remand this portion that you're having a hard time with back to your subject matter experts, the planning board, people that are in the business of issuing special permits, so they can articulate to you the criteria, and then you'll have a more thoughtful report on that particular limited issue, and then you could either add it or not add it, do with it what you will at that point in time.
So strike any buffer between any marijuana retailers, this is your suggestion, altogether, and then we'll come back with a petition by counselors to the planning board for clarification on their recommendations on adequate buffer and criteria for the waiver between marijuana retailers.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just add, if I could, we're some time away from adding, from issuing licenses.
Yes. Okay, so I believe that we have a motion and second to strike section 11 of, sorry, let me just get this right, 181.5656. I'm sorry, so it's 181.656, section 11. All those in favor of striking,
Make a motion to, okay.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, so we have strike that. Okay.
That's the final issue that you had before you tonight.
Do I need to read footnote number 12?
If it asks for a please vote, it does not need to be read.
It asks for a please clarify.
I have an incomplete packet here.
There's no vote necessary. This was a note on whether the waiver should be added to the 1,000-foot provision, which has been eliminated, so there's no vote
Yeah,
necessary.
okay.
Okay, that also addresses
Yep.
density provision.
I'm going to make a motion, we table 3118.
Second.
Table it as amended.
I have a motion and a second to table ordinance 03118 as amended like 19 times. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Move for suspension on 11118.
Okay, I have a motion for suspension on 11118. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Move 11118 be granted.
I have a motion and second to accept, that's just the changing of the dates for the state primary. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Granted, thank you.
11218 be sent to public safety.
I have a motion and second to send 11218 to public safety. All those in favor?
Aye.
Counselor,
Send 113 and 114.
Oh.
Last page. Public Works.
I have a motion and second to send 113 and 11418 to Public Works Committee. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Great. Before we adjourn, I do have a couple of announcements. So I want to talk about the Stand Against Racism event that is happening Friday, April 27th at the Fitchburg Senior Center from 4:30 to 7:30. That has a dynamic keynote speaker, J.J. Jackson from the Office of MIT. We also have student presentations from Fitchburg High School and Mount Wachusett students about what is racism, and then we also have recognition awards for outstanding community leadership awards. Second, just as a reminder that was posted in the newspaper over the weekend, that on Monday, April 23rd from 6 to 8 p.m., Revolutionary Clinics is holding a outreach meeting at the Antwell Heritage Apartments, 1 Oak Hill Road in Fitchburg. Any other announcements that need to be made? Okay, hearing none, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.